If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I was 32 this summer. I went to Black Hollow, West Virginia. I'd taken a contract as a traveling nurse at a small rural hospital outside Gauley Mountain. The pay was solid, but the hospital didn't provide housing, and rentals in town were overpriced. My Aunt Darlene, who had a reputation for collecting properties in forgotten places, offered me the use of her late husband's cabin. "It's out of the way," she said on the phone, "but quiet. Perfect if you don't mind solitude." At that point, solitude sounded like medicine. My job had worn me thin. I imagined coming off 12-hour shifts and retreating to a porch swing with a book, no one needing me. So I agreed. Black Hollow wasn't easy to find. The GPS lost me 20 minutes from the hospital, and the road narrowed to gravel and then dirt. The land seemed to fold in on itself, steep ridges pressing the hollow tight. The cabin sat low, its porch hemmed in by dense woods. A chicken coop sagged at the edge of the clearing, long abandoned. A woodshed leaned like it might collapse with one hard wind. Inside, it smelled of ash and damp timber. The living room had a wood stove and a sagging sofa. The bedroom contained nothing but an iron bed frame and a dresser that still held a few of Darlene's husband's flannels. No internet, no service, just me and the dark walls. At first, I loved it. After hospital chaos, the silence was luxurious. It started with scratching. 3 nights in, after a brutal double shift, I lay in bed half asleep when I heard it. Faint at first, then louder. A dragging sound beneath the floorboards. Too deliberate for mice, too slow for raccoons. It followed me. When I moved from the bedroom to the couch, the sound shifted with me, always beneath the floor. Long claws testing the wood. I convinced myself it was some animal nest I'd flush out later. But in the morning, when I crawled under the cabin with a flashlight, the dirt was hard-packed and bare. No tunnels, no nests. What I did find was stranger. 3 flat stones, pale gray, arranged in a triangle directly beneath the spot where my bed had been. The next week, I woke to the front door standing wide open. The lock was still thrown. The deadbolt extended. It made no sense. I closed it, tested the knob 10 times, went back to bed. Next morning, open again. I shoved a chair under the knob. Still open by dawn. When I tied it shut with cord looped to the oak table, the table had been dragged halfway across the floor. The cord had been cut clean. Not frayed. Cut. I began sleeping on the couch with the fire poker across my lap. That's when I saw the first light. Out the kitchen window, past the tree line, a faint glow pulsed once. Then again. Then vanished. It wasn't a flashlight or lantern. It didn't sway like someone carrying it. It blinked in place, like the earth itself was signaling. I stayed up until dawn, listening for movement. The only sound was my own heart pounding in my jaw. On the 12th night, the knocks came. 3 taps against the bathroom window. I froze. The sound was too sharp, too perfectly spaced to be branches. The next night, the taps moved to the living room glass. Then the kitchen. Always 3. Always following whichever room I occupied. The motion lights outside never came on. When I finally opened the door one morning, a gift waited on the mat. A small bone, polished smooth, balanced atop 3 gray stones in a triangle. Around that time, I began keeping a log, a nurse's habit, documenting events to make sense of them. But one morning I flipped open the notebook and found an entry I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was almost mine, but too neat. The words read, "You're being measured. 3 nights more." I tore the page out, shoved it into the stove, and burned it. The smoke reeked like coal dust and wet iron. Night 16, the landline rang. I didn't even know the cabin had a working phone. The ring echoed through the quiet like a fire alarm. I picked up, breathing, shallow, rasping. Then a whisper. "You locked the door." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded. The voice rasped, "Coalshade." "Coalshade," before dissolving into static. I dropped the phone. It swayed on its cord like a pendulum. I was ready to leave. I even packed a bag. But that night, a storm pinned me in, rain hammering, road turned to muck. Around 2 a.m., the roof groaned with weight. Step, step, step. Heavy measured, moving from one end of the cabin to the other. I killed the lantern. The only light came from the dying fire. Then a whisper seeped down through the stove vent. Long strings of broken syllables, not English, not any language I knew. The words tasted like grit in the air, filling my ears until they rang. I pressed against the brick, gripping the poker, waiting for dawn. The next day, desperate for answers, I asked at the hospital cafeteria if anyone knew stories about Black Hollow. A janitor overheard and set down his tray. His face looked carved from stone. "You heard the Coalshade," he said. He told me the old miners spoke of it. A figure that lived under the seams, thin as shadow, pale as ash. It marked houses with 3 stones. It followed with knocks. And if you listen long enough, it hollowed you out until you belonged underground with it. "They say it knows your name," he finished. "Say it can write it better than you can." I didn't plan another night. But my car wouldn't start. The battery was fine. The engine wouldn't even click. So I stayed one final time. At 2 a.m., the knocks came. Not outside. From inside the walls. The floor vibrated with the rhythm. The ceiling shook with each thud. Then silence. When I dared to open my notebook again, a fresh page had been filled in handwriting identical to mine. 3 stones wait at the door. I bolted at dawn, driving until the hollow was miles behind me. I left my aunt's keys under the mat and never spoke of what I'd seen. But back in town, when I unpacked my bag, my nursing journal fell open. The last page had changed. In my own handwriting, though I swear I never wrote it, were the words, "You'll come back. We've already measured the dark inside you." I was 29 that summer, sweating through the final push of graduate school. My dissertation focused on Appalachian back colonies, and I needed solitude to write my final reports. So when a professor suggested I use the old forestry cabin in Lost Creek Gorge, quiet, isolated, good for focus, I jumped at it. The cabin had once belonged to state rangers, abandoned after the funding dried up in the 80s. They still let students borrow it occasionally. Getting there required bouncing 10 miles down a dirt road that turned to rock, then hiking the last half mile with gear. By the time I reached it, I was drenched and irritated. It wasn't picturesque. 1 floor, sagging porch, a tin roof patched with mismatched sheets of metal. The air inside smelled of iron, mildew, and something sharp I couldn't place. A hand pump-out back supplied water, and there was a gas lamp mounted to the wall that hissed when I lit it. It was perfect for writing. No signal, no internet, no noise but the creek rushing somewhere below the gorge. For the first 3 days, I lost myself in charts and field notes. I woke with the sunrise, hiked ridge trails for exercise, then typed until my eyes burned. The silence of Lost Creek worked on me slowly, at first peaceful, then disconcerting. By day 4, I noticed something. My bat detector, an ultrasonic recorder I kept outside, began glitching. It would turn on at odd hours, recording long stretches of nothing but static and clicks too rhythmic to be animal calls. That night, I played one back. The clicks weren't random. They came in 3s. Click, click, click. Pause. Then again. It was just past midnight on day 5 when I stepped onto the porch with a mug of instant coffee. The forest was unnaturally still. No frogs, no katydids, no wind. The silence pressed against my chest. That's when I saw it. A faint flash deep in the gorge, like someone clicking a light on and off. Once, twice, then gone. It didn't move like a lantern or flashlight. It was fixed in place, a pulse with no source. I stood staring for 10 minutes, waiting for it to return. When it didn't, I convinced myself it was my eyes adjusting to the dark. Still, I double-checked the locks before bed. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to sound. 3 knocks. Not loud, but deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. The knocks came from the back door, the one that led to the pump. My heart slammed in my throat. I grabbed the field machete I kept by the cot, crept to the kitchen window, and peeked out. Nothing, only the faint outline of trees. But in my peripheral vision, movement. A figure, tall and thin, standing at the tree line. Motionless. Watching. I dropped the curtain, backed away, and sat frozen until dawn bled gray through the window panes. The next day, I hiked down to the creek to clear my head. But even there, something was wrong. Stones had been stacked into little towers along the bank, balanced in impossible formations. Coal chunks were wedged between them, shiny black against the gray rock. When I kicked one over, I swore I heard a faint knock echo up from beneath the ground. That night, the knocking returned. This time at the windows. Slow, deliberate taps circling the cabin one by one. I sat in the dark, clutching the machete, listening as the noise moved around me. My reflection in the window shifted with each tap, but I had the sickening sense another face hovered just behind it. On the sixth night, the landline rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The phone hadn't rung once since I'd arrived. 4 rings. Silence. Then it rang again. I forced myself to answer. Hello. For a moment, only static. Then a voice, low, rasping, but clear. You cataloged the caves, it whispered. You measured the dark. My chest tightened. I hadn't told anyone what I was working on. My research notes were in this cabin, nowhere else. Who is this? I demanded. The breathing on the line grew heavier. Then the voice said, almost amused, Why did you lock the door? I slammed the receiver down so hard it rattled the shelf. Then I dragged the kitchen table in front of the entrance, every nerve in my body screaming. At dawn, I found something waiting on the porch. A small figure made of coal shards bound together with twine, shaped crudely like a man. It stood upright in the center of the steps, facing the door. I used the shovel to toss it into the fire pit and doused it with kerosene. As it burned, the coal hissed and cracked, spitting sparks. For just a moment, I swore I saw pale fingers in the flames, reaching upward. By night 7, I'd stopped pretending it was all in my head. At 2:10 a.m., footsteps scraped the gravel outside. Not hurried. Measured. They circled once. Twice. Then stopped directly outside the screened porch, where I sat clutching the machete. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then came the whisper, slipping through the mesh. Come out. Come out. The tone wasn't angry. It was inviting, coaxing, like it knew I wanted to obey. I sat paralyzed until the whisper dissolved into the trees. The next morning, I hiked down to the valley town. I must have looked half feral, mud on my clothes, dark circles under my eyes. At the diner, I asked about strange lights in Lost Creek, about knocks in the night. A waitress froze mid-pour. She glanced at the old man at the counter, who shook his head slowly. Finally, she whispered, You've seen the Watcher. I leaned forward. What's that supposed to be? Her voice dropped. When the mines collapsed in 43, not all the men came back. Some say one stayed below, thin as a rail, pale as limestone. Comes out at night now, carrying the dark with him. He knocks so you'll answer. Once you do, he knows your name. I didn't plan to stay. I packed my things, ready to hike out. But a storm rolled in that afternoon, black clouds sealing the gorge, rain slashing so hard the road would be mud for days. So I endured one more night. At 2:23, the knocks came again. Not at the door this time. From inside the cabin. The walls. The floor. The ceiling. Every surface shook with steady, rhythmic pounding. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the knocks moved into my chest, vibrating my bones. Cricket whimpered and bolted beneath the cot, refusing to come out. Then silence. I opened my eyes and saw words scrawled across my research notebook in handwriting that wasn't mine. Anna, you measured the dark. The letters were damp, as though written in condensation. The storm cleared by dawn. I left everything but my pack and hiked out without looking back. I never returned to Lost Creek Gorge. But sometimes, while grading papers in my apartment, I'll hear it. 3 slow knocks on the wall. And when I check my notebooks, I find new lines written in my own hand, except I don't remember writing them, always signed with my name. I was 22 when I spent my first night completely alone in Red Hollow Forest. It wasn't supposed to be a test of courage. It was part of my internship with the Forestry Service, one of those solo weekend assignments where you stay in one of the old outposts, take notes on wildlife, and learn what it feels like to be isolated miles from civilization. The outpost wasn't glamorous. It was a squat log cabin built sometime in the 1940s, perched halfway up a slope where the ridgeline bent like an elbow. The floorboards creaked, the chimney leaned, and the single-pane windows rattled whenever the wind changed. But it had a cot, a wood stove, and shelves full of old field guides left by rangers long retired. I told myself it would be fine. I'd grown up hiking. I liked solitude. Besides, I had Cricket with me, my aging Labrador, more gray than black these days, but still alert enough to bark at squirrels. Having her along made me think the weekend might even be pleasant. The ranger who dropped me off told me with a grin, no cell service, no neighbors, no way out till Monday morning. He must have seen something in my face, because he added, "Don't worry. It's quiet up here." Quiet, it turned out, was heavier than I expected. The first day passed easily enough. I hiked the marked trail a little way, checked the water pump, and jotted some bird calls in the notebook they'd issued me. By sundown, I cooked macaroni on the propane stove, read by lantern light, and turned in early. But when darkness settled fully, I realized how complete it was. The forest didn't hum the way I was used to. No cicadas, no frogs. Even the breeze felt muffled. I lay awake on the cot, staring at the rafters, listening to my own heartbeat like it was the loudest sound in the world. It was around 10 when Cricket lifted her head. Her ears flicked, nose twitching. Then she gave this low, uneasy whine. I sat up, instantly alert. "What is it, girl?" She didn't bark, just stared toward the back door, the one that led to the storage shed. Her body stiffened, tail pressed down. I grabbed the flashlight, slipped on my boots, and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp leaves. I swept the beam across the clearing. Nothing but trees, their bare limbs clawing at the sky. Then the light caught something on the ground, just past the porch. A lantern. Old, rusted, glass cracked, not one I'd brought. It flickered faintly, though there was no flame inside. I didn't touch it. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to laugh it off. Maybe some ranger had left it as a prank. Maybe it had rolled out of the shed. But around an hour later, while I sat writing in the logbook, I heard them. Footsteps. Not the random scamper of a deer. Not the skitter of a raccoon. Deliberate. Slow. Crunching through the leaf litter, circling the outpost. I killed the lantern, heart hammering, and waited in the dark. Cricket pressed against my leg, trembling. The steps paused at the porch. Then came 3 knocks against the door. At first, silence. Then a man's voice, muffled through the wood. "Miss? You in there?" I froze. Truck broke down on the ridge road. Need a phone. My skin prickled. No truck could make it up here. The ranger had locked the gate 3 miles down. I forced my voice steady. "You need to leave." A pause. Then the handle jiggled lightly, almost politely. "You sure? Be quick. Just a call." Cricket growled low, a sound I'd rarely heard from her. I leveled the shotgun. Yes, they'd issued me one for bears. I said leave. For a long moment, nothing. Then a soft chuckle. "Suit yourself." The porch creaked as if someone shifted their weight. Then silence. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the rafters made me jump. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside cautiously. No footprints. No tire tracks. But hanging from 2 trees at the edge of the clearing was something new. A figure made of sticks, bound with sinew. About 2 feet tall, shaped like a crude man, dangling at eye level. I used a shovel to knock it down, carried it to the fire pit, and burned it to ash. The smell was foul, like wet hide and rancid grease. But as the flames died, I swore I heard faint knocking beneath the crackle. 3 slow thuds. Monday couldn't come soon enough. When the ranger finally picked me up, I didn't say much on the ride back. But curiosity got the better of me later that week. I stopped in a diner at the base of the ridge and asked casually about old stories. The waitress froze with the coffee pot midair. "Where'd you stay?" "Outpost 6, I said. She set the pot down carefully. "Don't go back there." "Why?" Her lips thinned. "Lantern Man walks those woods. Been seen since my granddaddy's time. Shows up when folks are alone. Carries light with no flame. Sometimes he talks sweet, asks for help. But if you answer the door," she trailed off. "What happens?" I pressed. She looked me dead in the eye. "Then he learns your name." A month later, against my better judgment, I returned. Part of the internship. Good experience, they called it. This time, I brought more supplies, more lanterns, and told myself the first time had been nerves. But the forest was waiting. The silence pressed heavier. The air smelled faintly metallic. And at 10:13 exactly, the knocking came again. "Miss? You in there?" Same voice. Same easy drawl. But this time, he added something new. He said my name. I bolted every door, sat clutching the shotgun, and whispered to Cricket, "Don't move. Don't make a sound." But the voice was patient. "Let me in, Anna." I hadn't told anyone in town my name. At midnight, the motion light on the east side flickered on. No path led that way, only dense trees. When I peeked through the curtain, the cracked lantern sat on the porch again, glowing faintly though no flame burned inside. And next to it, scrawled in the condensation of the window, were 3 words. "You stayed twice." I didn't last till dawn. I fled with Cricket, abandoning gear, hiking the 3 miles down in the dark with nothing but a flashlight. The rangers found me near the gate at sunrise, shaking, covered in mud. I refused to go back. But sometimes, in my apartment miles away, I wake at night to the sound of 3 slow knocks. Always calm, always patient. And last week, on the window above my bed, I found a handprint. Small, wet, and beneath it, traced in the fog, were the same words. "You stayed twice." I was 28 when I decided I'd had enough of classrooms, lesson plans, and administrators who measured human lives and test scores. Teaching 7th graders drained me until I was running on fumes. I loved the kids, but every day I walked out of that building feeling like a hollowed-out shell. When the migraine started, I knew I had to stop. So when a letter from some lawyer arrived saying an aunt I barely knew had left me her property in the hills of eastern Kentucky, I didn't hesitate. I thought, perfect. I'd never been there, but I remembered Mom speaking about her sister, Ruth, in clipped tones. A recluse, she called her. "Strange blood runs thick in those woods," she'd say, shaking her head. I chalked it up to Appalachian superstition. I packed my little hatchback with what I owned, left my apartment in Lexington, and drove southeast until the cell service bars dwindled to nothing. The road turned from paved to gravel, then to dirt, and then nothing but 2-wheel ruts carved into the slope. By the time I found the cabin, the sun was gone and I was running on nerves. The place sat crooked on the ridge, like it had been shoved out of the earth. A narrow porch sagged under the weight of damp moss. The windows were cloudy, the kind of glass that warps the world outside into indistinct shapes. The front door stuck when I pushed it, and the smell hit me instantly. A mixture of wet stone, pine pitch, and something faintly metallic, like old pennies left in a jar. Inside, it wasn't filthy, just old. Shelves full of canning jars. A rocking chair with a quilt folded neatly over the back. Drawers filled with yellowed papers. There was no electricity except a cranky generator in the shed. Water came from a hand pump outside. The strangest thing was the silence. Not just the absence of cars or people, but the absence of everything. No crickets, no owls, no rustle of raccoons in the underbrush. Just a quiet so heavy it pressed into my skin. I told myself it was exactly what I needed. No more bells, no more announcements, no more 3 a.m. grading sessions. Just me, a stack of paperbacks, and time to figure myself out. For the first week, it worked. It was on the 8th night when things shifted. I'd just finished heating soup on the gas stove and sat with a book in my lap, too tired to read. That's when I heard it, 3 knocks. Not frantic, not demanding. Just a steady thump, thump, thump against the front door. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Nobody knew I was here except the lawyer. The nearest neighbor was miles away, according to the map. My car was still parked out front, but I hadn't seen a single passerby since I'd arrived. I set the spoon down quietly and crept to the window. My breath fogged the glass as I peeked out. Nothing. The porch sagged in the moonlight, but it was empty. The knocks came again, this time from the back door. My skin prickled. There was no way anyone could have circled the cabin that fast without me hearing. I grabbed the cast iron poker from beside the stove and inched toward the kitchen window. That's when I saw it. On the condensation of the back window, someone had traced a word with their fingertip. A single name. Harlan. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, but the letters remained, faintly etched like they'd been pressed deep. I didn't know anyone named Harlan. Not in my family. Not in my past. I locked the back door, then the front, then even the root cellar hatch. I sat in the hall with the poker across my knees until dawn. The knocking never returned that night. But sleep didn't either. The next day, I drove down into the valley town, if you could call it that. Ashen Fork consisted of a gas pump, a tiny diner, a post office, and a hardware shop that doubled as a grocery. Folks stared when I walked in, like I had a target painted on my forehead. I asked casually if anyone knew the name Harlan. Said I saw it carved on a fence post near the ridge. Most shook their heads. One waitress muttered, "Some names ain't for speaking." The only one who gave me an answer was an older man at the gas station, his face lined like oak bark. When I mentioned the cabin, he squinted hard at me. "You Ruth's kin?" "Her niece," I said. He spat into the dirt. "Should have left that place to rot." Then he turned and walked away without another word. That night, I thought maybe I'd scared myself silly, and that it was all just imagination. Until I went to bed. Sometime past midnight, I woke to a sound overhead. Slow, deliberate steps across the roof. Not a squirrel. Not a raccoon. Too heavy. Too human. They started at the eaves and moved toward the center, right above my bed. Then silence. I lay there, frozen, clutching the quilt. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. At dawn, I climbed onto the roof with the ladder from the shed. My hands shook as I scanned the shingles. What I found stopped me cold. Footprints. Clear as day. Bare. Human. The toes pointed inward, almost pigeon-toed, and there were too many of them. As if more than one set overlapped, all circling the same spot above where I'd slept. By then, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. Behind the cabin, near the tree line, I'd noticed a patch of earth that always looked unsettled, like the ground sagged inward. A shallow depression. That morning, I fetched a spade from the shed and started digging. 2 feet down, the metal hit wood. A small box, wrapped in crumbling canvas. The wood split easily under the shovel blade. Inside were bones. Tiny, fragile. The kind that couldn't have belonged to an adult. Nestled beside them was a piece of fabric, stiff with age. Embroidered across it, in red thread that hadn't faded, was the same name. Harlan. My stomach twisted. My vision tunneled. I covered it back up with shaking hands, shoving dirt until the box was buried again, though the air around me felt wrong, like the trees were leaning closer. That night, the knocking returned. Not just at the front or the back, everywhere. The porch, the bedroom window, the root cellar door, even the attic hatch. Always 3 knocks. Always steady. I pressed my palms to my ears, but I could still feel them in my chest, like the rhythm of a second heartbeat. And then came the whisper. Not outside, not from the walls, from inside the cabin itself, seeping through the wood. A low, breathless voice, repeating the name over and over. Harlan! Harlan! I fled at dawn, driving back down into town. I found the old man at the gas station and demanded answers. His eyes went flat. "You should have never stayed the night up there." "What is Harlan?" I asked. My voice cracked. He shook his head, but after a long pause he spoke. "There was a mine, back before the war. Company men cut corners. Shaft collapsed. trapped a dozen men and boys. One of them was named Harlan Ridgway. They say he was still knocking on the timbers when the others went quiet. My stomach churned. And my aunt. He spat again. Ruth tried to keep him quiet. Cabins built near where the bodies were never pulled out. But you stirred it, digging where you shouldn't. I didn't go back intending to stay. I just wanted to grab my things and leave for good. But when I stepped inside, it was as though the cabin knew. Every door slammed shut. The windows darkened, though outside it was still bright daylight. And from beneath the floorboards came the sound of knocking. Steady, patient. I screamed, begged, shoved at the doors until my hands bled. The knocking spread to the walls, the ceiling, the roof. Surrounding me, trapping me. Then silence. I thought I'd gone deaf. But no, the quiet was worse. Because in that silence, I heard breathing. Not mine. Something close behind me. I turned. In the glass of the front window, where condensation had gathered once more, a handprint pressed flat against the pane. Small, child-sized, and below it, scrawled into the mist, was a new message. You stayed. I don't remember leaving. I just remember driving until the ridge was miles behind me. But at night, even now, I hear it sometimes. A soft thump, thump, thump against my apartment wall. Always 3 knocks. Always steady. And when I wake, there's condensation on the window. Sometimes with a name written in it. Not always Harlan. Sometimes it's my own. I was 27 when I returned to my grandmother's house in Ravens Fork, North Carolina. She'd passed the winter before, leaving the place abandoned at the bottom of the hollow. The family decided to sell, but before they could, someone had to box up her belongings. No one else volunteered. My parents lived 3 states away, my brother wouldn't take time off work, and my aunt refused to step foot there again after what she called bad memories. That left me. I'm a teacher. Summers are long and money's always short, so I told myself the week in the hollow would be practical. Free lodging while I sorted the house. Quiet enough to get some lesson planning done. I told myself I didn't mind. That was a lie. The gravel road into Ravens Fork curved like a spine through thick trees. My grandmother's place sat at the very end, 2 stories, peeling paint, a sagging porch swing that hadn't moved since she died. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and damp books. Her quilts still hung over chairs. The wood stove was still black with soot. In the hallway closet, the string to the attic hatch swayed when I walked past, though no windows were open. The first day I tried to work. I stacked her hymnals, folded quilts, labeled boxes. But when dusk fell, the silence pressed in. Not normal country silence, but something alive, listening. I kept the porch light on that night, though no one ever came down our road. On the second morning, I found carvings on the beech trees at the edge of the yard. 3 marks, evenly spaced, like slashes from a knife. Beneath them, someone had pressed a smooth stone into the bark, wedged so tight I couldn't pry it out. I walked the yard twice looking for tracks. Nothing. That night, as I sat in the kitchen sorting photos, I heard the first knock. 3 taps on the window over the sink. I froze, photo slipping from my fingers. Outside, only the black shape of trees. No movement. No wind. I shut the curtains. The next evening, the knocks followed me. When I moved into the living room, they came at the glass there. When I climbed the stairs, they echoed against the window at the landing. Always 3. Always slow. The old dog my grandmother had kept, a shepherd mix named Penny, pressed against my leg, whimpering but not barking. She watched the windows like something on the other side was watching back. At midnight, the landline rang. It hadn't rung once since I arrived. I lifted the receiver with shaking hands. At first, only static. Then a voice, dry and brittle as fallen leaves. You locked the door. I slammed it down. By day 4, I'd stopped sleeping in the upstairs bedroom. I dragged a blanket onto the couch. But that night, footsteps began in the ceiling. Slow, deliberate pacing. Back and forth, exactly where my grandmother's room had been. I knew the attic was unfinished, nothing but rafters and dust. No one had reason to be there. The pacing stopped directly above me. Then came the sound of something heavy being dragged across boards. Penny whimpered, crawled under the table, and refused to move until dawn. The next morning I found something new. On the piano in the front room, untouched for years, a sheet of paper sat. A hymn page, but not like any I recognized. The notes were smeared, the lyrics written in jagged pencil. The words repeated down the page. We knock so we are known. We sing so we are remembered. The handwriting looked unsettlingly like my grandmother's. I burned the page in the stove. The smoke reeked like iron. That night, the sounds moved outside. Step, step, step. Footsteps crossed the roof, slow and patient. Not the scurry of raccoons, too heavy, too even. I shut off the lights, heart pounding, and listened as they moved from one end of the house to the other. Then silence. A minute later, the attic string in the hallway began to sway. At 3 a.m., I heard it. Not knocking. Not footsteps. A whisper at the door's mail slot. Dry, breathless words. You left it open. I screamed before I realized my throat was open. Penny barked once, sharp and terrified. When I dared to check, the door was locked tight. The porch was empty, but on the mat outside sat 3 stones arranged in a triangle, and atop them, a slip of paper smeared with ash. No words, only a single black fingerprint. The next day, I drove to town. My hands shook so badly I dropped my wallet at the diner counter. I asked the waitress, careful, if she'd ever heard of Knox and Raven's Fork. She went pale. An old man at the end of the counter muttered, the hollow choir. He said when miners died in unmarked shafts, their voices got trapped in the mountains. They came knocking at houses, whispering at doors, begging to be heard. They want a singer, he told me. Someone to carry their hymns. Don't listen long enough to learn the tune. I decided to leave, but when I loaded my car, the battery was dead. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles away, and the road washed out with rain by dusk. I had no choice but one more night. At 2 a.m., the knocks began. Not on the glass this time. From inside the walls. Every beam and board shuddered with the rhythm. Penny howled once, then fell silent. I pressed my hands over my ears. The knocks grew louder, faster, until they blurred into a sound like 100 fists hammering in unison. Then silence. I opened my eyes to see the piano in the front room. The keys pressed down one by one, though no one sat there. A tune emerged, jagged, halting, but a melody all the same. And against my will, my throat opened. I hummed along. When dawn finally bled through the curtains, I bolted. I packed nothing. Left boxes half done, dishes in the sink. I drove until Raven's Fork was a blur in the rear view. The house still stands, but I won't go back. And yet, when I unpacked my school bag at home, I found a hymn sheet folded inside my notebook. The words scrawled in handwriting too close to mine to deny. You sang with us once. You will sing again. My name's Ethan Rourke, and I was 33 when I agreed to spend the winter watching over my uncle's cabin deep in the hills of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. I wasn't looking for adventure. I wasn't running from anything, either, at least not at first. I just needed quiet. After burning out from a teaching job in Pittsburgh, I wanted space where no one could knock on my door, ask for help, or expect me to plaster on a fake smile. My uncle's cabin was perfect. Tucked into a hollow where the nearest neighbor was a faded Jesus Saves sign nailed to a dead oak 2 miles up the road. Uncle Bill promised me an easy routine. Keep the firewood chopped, collect spring water when the pipes froze, and feed the pair of half-wild goats he left behind. He joked that if I kept them alive until March, he'd name the first kid after me. I laughed, but a part of me really believed it would be a calm, restorative winter. The first 2 weeks were almost idyllic. Cold air, crisp stars, mornings of wood smoke and silence. I'd wake with the sun, stoke the stove, carry water, then spend the day reading battered paperbacks or scribbling half-thoughts in a notebook. At night, I'd fiddle with the old shortwave radio Uncle Bill had left behind. Its dial hummed with static, and sometimes I'd catch fragments of gospel choirs, truckers bantering, or voices speaking languages I didn't recognize. It felt like listening to ghosts. But the silence was the strangest part. It pressed in on me, deeper than any city dweller could imagine. Not a car, not a neighbor's dog, not even the distant hum of power lines. Some nights I lay in bed and realized I hadn't spoken aloud in 24 hours. And still, it didn't scare me. Not yet. The first hint that something wasn't right came from the goats. One evening, after splitting wood, I noticed they hadn't gone inside their small barn. Instead, they stood motionless in the yard, facing the slope of trees behind the cabin. Their ears twitched, but otherwise they didn't move. At first, I thought it was a coyote nearby, but the goats didn't make a sound, not even the nervous bleating they usually did when spooked. They were silent, frozen, watching the tree lean as if waiting for someone to step out. I clapped my hands, shouted, even nudged them with a stick. Nothing. Their glassy eyes reflected the faint lantern glow, locked on the black mouth of the forest. Eventually, I gave up and left them there. That night, at 3:11 a.m., I woke to a noise at my window. Tap, tap, tap. 3 sharp raps, like a fingernail on glass. My room was on the second floor. I held my breath. The sound stopped the instant I sat up. For a long moment, all I heard was the groan of old wood shifting in the cold. I told myself it could have been ice cracking, or maybe a raccoon somehow climbing the siding. Still, I couldn't shake the image of a hand, long and pale, resting against the window pane. I didn't sleep again that night. The following evening, as I was chopping kindling, the power cut out. No wind, no storm, just click, darkness swallowing the cabin. I lit a kerosene lantern and walked through the house, checking fuses. Everything looked fine. That's when I heard it. Thud. A slow, deliberate knock on the porch. Then another. Then a third. Not knuckles this time. More like the blunt end of a staff, striking wood in a steady rhythm. I raised the lantern and swung open the door. The porch was empty, but across the yard, near the tree-line, something shifted. At first, it looked like a figure holding a lantern of its own. A faint, black flame flickering inside a glass case. The light didn't illuminate, it smothered. A darkness that moved like liquid. I blinked, and the figure seemed to fold back into the trees, vanishing without footsteps. That night, I dragged the heavy table in front of the door and slept on the floor with my uncle's hunting rifle across my chest. By morning, the goats were gone. Their barn door stood open, latch unbroken. Not a track in the snow. No blood. Just gone. Over the next nights, things escalated. First came the scratching. Behind the walls, above the ceiling, under the floorboards, slow, dragging scrapes like claws through insulation. I tore open paneling, crawled under the house, even set traps. Nothing. Then footsteps. Rapid, skittering ones, like a dog's nails across hardwood. Only, I didn't own a dog. The footsteps always stopped the instant I moved. On the 5th night, I heard a voice. "Let me see you." It came from the hallway. But it wasn't one voice. It was a dozen, overlapping and stuttering, as though the speaker had stitched together syllables from scraps it had overheard. "Let me see you." Every hair on my body rose. My throat went dry. That was the night I decided I wasn't staying. The next morning, I drove down to the gas station near Richwood, hoping to calm my nerves. The old man behind the counter looked me over when I bought coffee and finally asked if I was staying up in Black Hollow. When I nodded, he frowned. "Shouldn't. Folks don't stay there past autumn. You seen the lantern yet?" I froze. He explained in a whisper that hunters used to tell stories of a figure carrying a black lantern through the hollows on winter nights. They said it wasn't a man but a watcher, bound to the woods after some forgotten ritual. The lantern didn't light the way. It collected what strayed too far from safety. Livestock, pets, travelers. Don't follow it, the man warned. And if it comes to your door, don't answer. That night it came back. The scratching, the footsteps, and finally the tapping. Not at the window this time. At the front door. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I held my breath, rifle steady. And then I saw it, through the thin gap in the curtains. A tall figure at the tree-line, lantern swinging, spilling not light but shadow across the snow. its head bent too far to one side, neck angled like broken timber. The goats were standing beside it, perfectly still, watching me. I snapped. I grabbed my keys, slung the rifle, and bolted. Barefoot, coatless, I tore across the yard and into the truck. I didn't look back. Gravel sprayed as I fishtailed down the road, headlights cutting the black trees into slashes of white. Only when I hit the paved highway did I dare glance in the mirror. The cabin was barely visible in the distance, but on its roof, crouched like some obscene gargoyle, was the figure, lantern held high, watching me leave. I never went back. I left the truck idling in front of the sheriff's office in Richwood and told them the cabin was theirs if they wanted it. I rented a small apartment in Charleston, surrounded by neighbors and traffic noise. Still, some nights, when everything falls quiet, I hear it again, 3 faint taps. And in the dark, behind my eyelids, I see the goats, standing in the snow, facing the trees, waiting. I don't know if the lantern is tied to Black Hollow alone, or if it followed me. But I do know this: silence is never empty. It's listening, and one night soon, it might want to be seen. I was 24 the winter I agreed to house sit for my aunt and uncle in southern West Virginia, near a forgotten speck on the map called Pine Gap. They were heading down to Myrtle Beach for 2 weeks, chasing warm weather while I kept an eye on their place. It wasn't a bad deal. They offered me a little cash, a stocked freezer, and solitude, something I'd been craving after quitting my job at a machine shop in Charleston. The noise, the grease, the constant pressure had worn me raw. Pine Gap was the opposite. No neighbors, no traffic, no bars or restaurants within shouting distance. Just their squat ranch-style house squatting at the end of a long gravel lane, with the Monongahela forest wrapping around it like a dark ocean. I told myself it'd be easy. Tend the firewood, feed the old hound, check the pipes so they didn't freeze. Mostly I wanted to read, sleep, and figure out what to do with my life. The first 3 nights, that's exactly what I did. Quiet meals, a couple beers, paperback westerns by the stove. The dog, an arthritic coonhound named Tater, barely moved from his rug, except when I rattled a food dish. It was so still out there that I found myself talking to him, just to hear a human voice. And then the whistling began. The first time I heard it, I was washing dishes. A thin melody floated in from the woods behind the house. Not a song, exactly, just 4 notes, drawn out and uneven. It reminded me of someone trying to recall a tune they'd half forgotten, fumbling through it off key. I froze, soap sliding down my arm, listening. It came again. 4 notes. Paused. 4 notes again, slower. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. But he didn't bark. He didn't even growl. He just stared at the back door with those cloudy eyes of his. I told myself it was some local kid, maybe hunting or messing around. But my stomach didn't buy it. Nobody lived close enough for a prank like that, and there were no trails back there, just miles of thick timber. I stepped outside with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the yard. The trees loomed like a wall of black iron. The whistle had stopped. No wind, no movement, nothing. I shut the door and locked it. 2 nights later, the power cut out. It was around 9, and I was halfway through a book when the lamps blinked and went dark. The house fell into a suffocating black, so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I lit one of the kerosene lanterns my uncle kept in the hall and tried the breaker. No dice. That's when I heard footsteps. Not on the porch. Not outside. Inside. Fast, skittering steps across the living room floor. Like a child running barefoot. The lantern trembled in my hand. Tater let out a low whine from the rug and pressed himself flat, as if hoping the floor would swallow him. The steps stopped the instant I moved. I stood frozen, listening, heart hammering. Then, from somewhere down the hall, the whistle drifted through the dark. 4 notes, stretched and broken. I wanted to tell myself it was the wind, but wind doesn't move across hardwood. Wind doesn't whistle the same crooked tune from 2 nights ago. I slept that night with every light blazing, rifle across my chest. The next night, the knocking started. 3 slow raps at the front door. Not the brisk, polite kind. Heavy, deliberate. I clenched the rifle tighter. Didn't breathe. The knocks came again, harder this time. Then stopped, and after a pause, a voice rasped through the wood. "I know you're awake." Every muscle in my body locked. The voice wasn't loud, but it was close, like someone leaning against the door. Tater whimpered once, then went dead silent. The doorknob jiggled just a little, as though being tested. I thought about shouting, about pumping around into the ceiling to scare them off, but my throat had closed like a vice. Then came a long scrape across the porch. We're dragging against wood. A chair? A heavy boot? I couldn't tell. I sat on the floor until the cold numbed my legs. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, rifle still across my lap. At dawn, I forced myself to open the door. On the porch lay a dead raccoon. Not torn up. Not scavenged. Just stiff, laid neatly on the top step. Its eyes had been sewn shut with coarse black thread, ugly excess puckering the skin. And around its neck hung a leather tag, carved with 5 straight tally marks. I gagged, grabbed a shovel, and buried it 50 yards into the woods. The whole time, I felt like something was standing just out of sight, watching. When I got back, the front door, still locked, had fresh scratches across it. Long, deliberate gouges, too high for any animal. That afternoon, I drove into town, shaken. At the diner, I let something slip to an old man at the counter. A retired logger, skin like wrinkled parchment. "You're up near Pine Gap, ain't ya?" he said when I mentioned the house. "Shouldn't stay there in December." When I asked why, he leaned close. "They say a whistler haunts those ridges. Old story. Goes back before the mines. Some preacher's boy vanished out there one winter. His pa heard him whistling outside the house 3 nights after the search ended. Folks say if you hear it, you're being counted. And if you're marked." He tapped his coffee cup with a bony finger. "It always comes back for the final number." I laughed weakly, but his eyes didn't. That night, the whistling returned. Louder. Clearer. This time, it circled the house. For notes from the woods. Then 4 notes outside the kitchen. Then 4 notes by the porch. I pressed my back to the wall, rifle shaking in my hands. Tater crawled beneath the bed, tail tucked so hard it might have snapped. Hours dragged by. Then silence. When I finally cracked the door at dawn, another gift waited. A crow. Dead, wings splayed. Its eyes sewn shut. The leather tag this time bore 6 tally marks. By the second week, I wasn't sleeping. I jumped at every creak of the floorboards, every gust against the siding. I stopped going outside after dark. But the whistling didn't stop. It grew bolder. Sometimes I heard it humming from inside the walls, muffled but close. Sometimes it rose from the floorboards beneath my feet. On my final night there, I swear I heard it from just outside the bedroom door. The knob rattled once. Twice. Then the voice came again, layered and broken, as though several throats spoke at once. 7. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Something scratched against the wood for a long time, then padded away. Morning came. The house looked normal in that cruel daylight way. But at the porch, I froze. A third gift. This time, it wasn't an animal. It was the dog. Tater, laid out stiff on the step, eyes sewn shut, leather tag strung around his neck. 7 tally marks. I don't remember dropping the rifle. I don't remember starting the truck. I just remember gravel spraying as I tore down the road, engine screaming, refusing to look in the mirror. I never went back to Pine Gap. My aunt and uncle thought I made up the story because I didn't want to admit losing their dog. They sold the house a year later anyway, after the roof collapsed in a storm. But I still hear it. Some nights, when the city goes quiet and the wind dies, and I'm drifting on the edge of sleep. 4 notes whistle through the dark. Off-key. Patient. And I know wherever I go, the count isn't finished. My name's Daniel Crow. I'm 31 now, but this happened when I was 22, right after I dropped out of college. Back then, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wasted a scholarship, lost most of my friends, and come crawling back to the mountains where I grew up. My Aunt Ruth owned a weather-beaten hunting cabin along Laurel Fork, a jagged stretch of the Allegheny Highlands in western Virginia. She hadn't used the place in years, and when she heard I needed some space, she offered it up for the summer. Her only warning, spoken so casually I thought nothing of it: "Stay out of the cellar. It's not safe down there." I thought she meant the wood was rotten, or the beams might collapse. If only it had been that simple. The drive out alone told me how cut off I'd be. Past the tiny town of Bardo, the paved road gave way to gravel that twisted upward through thick spruce and hemlock. The air grew cooler, thinner, quieter. The cabin itself was slumped into a hillside like it had been set down wrong. Faded green tin roof, walls leaning just enough to make you uneasy, windows dulled with dust. But it was mine, at least for a while. There was no cell service, no internet, just an old rotary phone that looked like it hadn't worked since Carter was president. I had books, a box of old VHS tapes, and enough canned food to keep me from starving. I thought that kind of solitude would be good for me. The first 2 nights passed quietly. Too quietly. At night, the forest pressed against the house like a weight. No wind in the trees, no calls of whippoorwills, not even crickets. Just silence, so heavy it hummed in my skull. I told myself it was peaceful, but by the 3rd night, I was catching myself staring into the woods too long, half expecting someone to be staring back. It was after midnight, and I'd just killed the lantern when I heard it. A whisper. "Don't open the cellar." It came from under the floorboards, low and wet, like breath forced through damp rags. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The sound was gone almost instantly, leaving behind a silence that felt pleased, like it had gotten my attention. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the fireplace with an axe across my lap, telling myself I'd only imagined it. By morning, logic tried to take over. Maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe it was air shifting in the crawlspace, or water in the pipes. Anything but what it had sounded like. Still, I avoided looking at the cellar door. 2 nights later, it escalated. I was brushing my teeth when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, careful, pacing directly above me. The problem? The cabin didn't have an upstairs. Just a slanted attic with no floor, no way to walk across it. I stood frozen, toothbrush dangling from my mouth. Each creak pressed down through the ceiling, deliberate as if someone wanted me to hear. I grabbed a lantern and climbed onto a chair, shining light through the attic hatch. Nothing but insulation and rafters. Yet the air smelled foul, sweet and cloying, like flowers rotting in a vase. That night, the footsteps returned at 3:17 a.m., and again an hour later, each time right above me. I stopped sleeping. By the end of the week, I was unraveling. I talked to myself just to break the silence. Kept every light burning. Carried the axe from room to room like some sacred object. It was around dusk when I heard my mother's voice. "Danny, please. I'm locked in. Open the door." It came from the cellar. My blood went cold. She was 3 counties away, and she never called me Danny. The voice trembled again, its cold son. "Please, just open it." Every part of me wanted to run, but I found myself moving closer, step by step, until I stood at the top of the cellar door. The old iron latch trembled once. Then 3 knocks. Measured. Certain. I backed away, locked myself in the bathroom. I must have cried, though I don't remember doing it. When I woke hours later, my face was crusted with salt, and the house smelled of damp earth. The dream came the next night. I woke to see a man standing at the foot of my bed, tall and motionless, wrapped head to toe in filthy cloth. The bandages hung damp and heavy, as if soaked in something that never dried. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. When I jerked awake for real, the smell of soil and iron lingered, and muddy footprints led from the end of my bed to the doorway. I hadn't walked them. By morning, I was ready to leave. I shoved my few things into a bag, but when I opened the front door, something lay waiting on the step. A dead hare, not torn or eaten, just placed there stiff. Its eyes had been crudely sewn shut with black thread. A wooden disc hung from its neck, carved with strange grooves, 5 straight notches like tally marks. I buried it 50 yards into the trees. The whole time I felt eyes on me. Desperate for answers, I drove into Bardo and spilled my nerves to the clerk at the gas station. An old man stocking shelves overheard. He set his crate down slow and asked me where I was staying. When I told him, he went pale. "Best get out of there," he muttered. "That hollow ain't right. Folks used to say something was buried in those hills. Not a person. Not exactly. More like a hunger." He told me about a preacher's son who'd vanished in the 1890s, back when families scratched out lives on those ridges. The search ended after 3 days, but that night, his father swore he heard his boy calling from the cellar. He opened it, was never seen again. They say the thing in cloth walks after dark. Counts folk. Marks 'em. Don't matter if you run. Once you're tallied, it finishes sooner or later. The old man wouldn't meet my eyes after that. That night, the house came alive. First, the footsteps circling the cabin. Then scratching, long claws dragging across the walls. At midnight, the cellar boomed with knocks. 1, 2, 3. Then came the whisper again, layered with many voices now. 6. I froze. The words slid beneath the door like smoke. When I forced myself to look, a shadow leaked out from the cellar cracks, seeping across the floorboards like spilled ink. I retreated into the kitchen, heart punching holes in my chest. That was when the porch creaked. Something heavy shifted its weight outside the front door. I didn't open it. Couldn't. At dawn, I tried the truck. Dead. The battery lifeless. But on the hood lay another offering. The dog from the cabin down the ridge. Stuffed stiff, eyes sewn, and around its neck, a wooden disc with 7 tally marks. I vomited into the gravel. Then I ran. I left everything behind, bag, books, food. Just sprinted until my legs buckled at the edge of town. I never set foot near Laurel Fork again. My aunt sold the cabin the next spring. She never asked why I left it in such a hurry, and I never told her. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the world goes still, I hear it again. 3 knocks. Then a voice at the edge of my thoughts, wet and patient. 8. And I know somewhere, that number isn't finished. My name is Michael Keene, and I wasn't supposed to inherit anything from my family. Certainly not the nightmare I walked into on Wolf Pine Ridge. It's been almost 8 years since I spent a winter there, but I still wake some nights with my chest tight and the taste of cold moss on my tongue. People ask why I never went back for the house. I tell them it collapsed, or I sold it, or it wasn't worth the taxes. What I don't say is that something is still walking in those woods, and once it's counted you, there's no giving the number back. I was 30 when it happened. I'd been teaching history at a community college in Roanoke, and to put it plainly, I had nothing left to show for it. My wife had filed for divorce, citing absence, though I lived in the same house. The administration had cut my position after enrollment dropped. I packed what was left of my life into a single duffel bag, and for the first time in years, I didn't have a reason to wake up in the morning. That's when the letter arrived. It was from a lawyer in a little town I barely remembered, Calhoun's Gap, West Virginia, tucked at the edge of the Monongahela wilderness. My great-uncle Eli, who I hadn't seen since childhood, had passed, leaving me his property. Nobody else wanted it. His siblings said it was too far gone, not safe, best left to the trees. To me, it sounded like a chance. So I went. The road curled higher and higher until it was just gravel and frost. The house sat at the end like it was ashamed of itself, half hidden under a canopy of skeletal pines. It leaned as if gravity had been chewing at it for years. Paint curled like dead skin. A porch sagged with gaps wide enough to swallow a boot heel. And the cellar doors, iron-strapped and sunken into the earth, looked older than the rest of the structure, like the house had been built to cover them. There was no cell service. The only working phone was a rotary anchored to the kitchen wall. It still had my great-uncle's voice on the line, captured in a warbled message. "Leave your number. I'll call when I can." He'd been dead 3 weeks. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It pressed down, thick and deliberate, as though the house itself was waiting to hear what I'd say. The 4th night is when I realized solitude wasn't the worst thing in those hills. I was reading by lantern when a knock came at the door. 3 strikes. Slow. Precise. Not frantic like a traveler lost in the dark. Not casual like a neighbor dropping by. Practiced. I froze, book sliding off my lap. Nobody should have been there. The road was practically erased by snow, and the only other occupied property I'd passed was a rusted trailer 5 miles down. I checked the peephole. Nothing. Just the dark line of trees. Then the knock came again. Same rhythm. I opened the door with a fireplace poker in hand. The night air bit into me like ice water. The porch was empty, but the silence afterward wasn't empty. It felt full, as if something had gotten exactly the reaction it wanted. The next morning, I found the footprints. Not boot prints. Bare. Small. The moss around the house had kept their shape, sharp enough for me to see every detail. They were too long in the toes, the arches too flat, the heels narrow. They weren't human, not really. They circled the house, stopped under windows, doubled back at the cellar, and in 2 spots they just stopped, like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. I told myself it was some half-wild kid, some prank. But when I walked to the ridge to see how far they went, they didn't fade into distance. They just ended mid-stride in the snow. That was when the air seemed to shift. The pines stood still, as though listening. I left the tracks alone. Night 5, I woke to the sound of breathing outside my bedroom window. Not steady like sleep. Wet. Labored. Like someone drowning quietly against the pane. I lay still, every nerve screaming, watching frost bloom across the glass. The sound lingered for 20 minutes before it faded. At dawn, I found new prints. Smaller this time. Dozens. Some led to the cellar doors. Some curved under the attic vent. Some ended beneath my window. I moved furniture against doors, nailed boards over the hatch, kept the axe by my bed. The silence had changed. It wasn't passive anymore. It was waiting. I broke. I drove into Calhoun's Gap for supplies I didn't need, desperate for voices, for someone to tell me the world was still normal. At the general store, an old man stocking flour bags asked where I was staying. When I told him, his face fell. "You're up in Eli's place," he said. "Then you've heard them by now." I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. He leaned close and whispered, "The Hollow Men." He said people used to whisper about them long before my great-uncle lived there. Thin figures, not alive, not dead, walking in winter. They don't break in, they wait to be let. If they count you among them, they finish the number, no matter how far you run. I asked what to do. The man just shook his head. "Don't talk back when they knock. Don't look if they breathe. And whatever you do, don't open the cellar." That night, the rotary phone rang. It startled me so bad I nearly dropped the lantern. When I picked it up, all I heard was static, then a click, and then, in a voice that sounded like my ex-wife's, soft and clear, "Michael, we're here. Don't pretend you don't see us." I slammed it down so hard the bell rattled, pulled the cord out of the wall. The silence afterward was worse than the call, because I realized whoever spoke hadn't been trying to trick me into opening the cellar. They were reminding me they'd already been inside. At 3 a.m., I woke to 3 knocks. Not on the door, not on the window, on the ceiling, directly above my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, a faint dragging sound across the attic floorboards. Slow, deliberate. I prayed the boards I'd nailed over the hatch would hold. When morning came, they were still there, but gouges clawed through the wood as though something had tried to pry them loose. Before leaving for good, I circled the house once. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof it hadn't been all in my head. I ended up at the oak tree I used to climb when I was a boy. Carved deep into the bark with something jagged were 3 words. "You let us in." And everywhere around the porch, the cellar doors, the windows were tracks. Not just circling this time, climbing. Some scaled the siding. Some led straight into the roof. The Hollow Men hadn't been outside. They'd already been waiting inside. I never went back to Wolfpine Ridge. I rented a place outside Charleston, took a job at a lumber yard, learned how to sleep with the television on. But some nights, when the house goes too quiet, the silence thickens into something else. And then I hear it. 3 knocks. Sometimes it's on the door. Sometimes the ceiling. Once, it came from inside the walls. I don't answer. I never will. But I know one day the counting ends. And when it does, I'll be among them.